Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final panel, the final day of our annual special event on the ground here in Warsaw, in Poland, Warsaw Week 2025, Retooling the Transatlantic Alliance for an Age of Uncertainty. My name is Aaron Koreva. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council Warsaw office. Great to see so many of you here with us today, and a big welcome to all of you joining us from all over the world virtually. We're glad to have you. Today's panel is going to discuss how Poland is forming new alliances, new bonds in a way that strengthens the transatlantic ties. I would like to give a big thank you to all of our partners and a special thank you to our gracious host, Dentons, who provided this excellent space today. And therefore, over to my good friend, David from Dentons. David, would you please come up here and say a few words?
Really, what I want to say is welcome to all our distinguished guests, our incredibly distinguished panel. We're delighted to be hosting our good friends Atlantic Council and looking forward to a very exciting and interesting discussion. So welcome and enjoy.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I'm Dr. Alexander Olech, and I have this marvelous pleasure to moderate this panel. And thank you very much, Atlantic Council. Thank you very much, Aaron, also for choosing this good date, because we are just after the presidential election. So this panel is even more relevant. So I have four marvelous speakers, and I can assure you that they are the best we can provide you with. So starting from my left, it's Ambassador Daniel Fried, Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow, Atlantic Council, former U.S. ambassador to Poland. Then next speaker, Marta Parchowicz-Jazowska, Deputy Head of Office and Police Fellow, Warsaw European Council of Foreign Relations. Next, Ambassador John Herbst, Senior Director, Eurasia Central Atlantic Council. And finally, our Polish representative, Ambassador Marek Magierowski, Non-Resident Senior Fellow, Europe Center Atlantic Council. I am Dr. Alexander Olech, and I have this pleasure to ask you some difficult questions, but also I have a gift, and the audience will be asking questions at the end of this panel. So, dear Ambassador, starting with you, I have heard, and also of my colleagues heard, that the frame of buying the US military equipment is some kind of giving us this strategic partnership. Do you believe that having those security guarantees from the US, it means buying more equipment, and it's gonna work with the current Trump administration?
President Trump likes to promote US exports. He likes to promote US business. Poland is building up its military, and it will be buying more from the US. That is a big help. And since Poland, the Polish position, as I understand it, is the US military presence in Poland is important, and I think that Poland is correct in this. The extra tie to Trump and Trump's interest in, let us say, material rather than abstract interests is going to be a big help. But it is also true at the same time that military expenditures across Europe, and including Poland, Poland's in the lead, but it's not the only European country that is building up its military. There's going to be a bigger pot of money all around. And that means that we should be thinking in terms of cooperation between our defense industries. And not make this a zero-sum game, but figure out a way to work with each other, and by the way, with Ukrainian industries, who are going to emerge from this war as some of the world's leaders in things like drone technology. So this is an area where we ought to be working together. And if Kubilius, the Commissioner for Defense Industry practically, is able to do this, more power to him. But this is an area of complicated but potentially very fruitful transatlantic and US-Polish cooperation.
So can we say that Poland, the US, and Ukraine are going to create some kind of triangle when all three countries will benefit from?
John Herbst and I were recently in Ukraine, and one of the interesting topics we covered with Ukrainian officials was the potential of the Ukrainian arms industry in general and the drone industry in particular. They're looking for partners. What they're not looking for is for outside companies to go in, take their technology, and give them not much in return. They're interested in building up their capacity and getting a very good deal. Now, is it going to be American firms, Rheinmetall, British firms, French firms, or Polish firms? And that depends on the terms that these companies will offer. And it's, I think, in everybody's interest that Western companies offer good terms to the Ukrainians and that we figure out how to use Ukrainian technology to build up our collective drone capacity, because modern drones, as we have seen, on Sunday, right? Operation Spiderweb, are a damned effective way of throwing an aggressor on the back feet, and that could apply to China. I'm thinking of military experts who have argued that to frustrate Chinese aggressive designs, we ought to start building and developing swarms of drones, air and sea, and the Ukrainians are going to have something to do with it. So the rewards will go to those companies that are the defense companies that are the most creative and serious. Poland has certain advantages working with Ukrainian companies, but it's up to Polish companies, up to American companies to do the best they can, and this is a competition I really welcome.
Thank you, and I would like to do a follow-up to this question. Ambassador Herbst, in light of growing competition in Eastern Europe, I'm not thinking only about Poland, but also other states that are interested to invest in Ukraine. What new forms of cooperation could Poland develop with the Eastern Partnership, but with the coordination from the United States?
All right. One, Poland has a very important role to play in this crisis of Moscow's war on Ukraine and Moscow's ambitions beyond Ukraine for two reasons. The first is the Polish people and Polish leadership, even the different parts of the leadership, understand that Moscow would like to have control over Poland too. And so they act energetically against this danger. And secondly, of course, you've managed to have a very good relationship with the current president of the United States. And the fact that even actors in the current administration that don't, in my judgment, fully appreciate the importance to the United States of NATO consider Poland to be a model ally. So that gives you stature in Washington with this group that can be very useful to, you might say, coax them, entice them in the right direction. That means you're well positioned to play a role, in the big geopolitics of this war, through the influence you can exert in Washington, while also encouraging your EU partners to be bolder. And you have a substantial economy which can contribute materially to Ukraine's war effort. Now, I pay a fair amount of attention to drones, but I'm not going to tell you that I am an expert or completely up to date. But my understanding is that you're kind of behind the curve if you want to play large in Ukraine's evolving drone industry. The country which, to my mind, is clearly in the lead, sadly not the United States. Some big operators, well-known names, went to Ukraine 2 years ago and were seeking for chump change to get access to technology, and the Ukrainians are not stupid, and they understood that. The country that's actually doing the best work is the UK. All the smart people in the Ukrainian drone industry are spending lots of time in London. So I don't see any other country in Europe in the same forward position as the Brits. So just a little word to the wise, this is something you may want to focus on if you want to get truly involved in this. And while I am, of course, an American patriot and would love to see America in the lead here, you know, if you have stupid, greedy people leading the charge, you don't expect great results. Even if those stupid people have done very well in business.
Thank you very much. I would like to stay with this administration in Washington. Ambassador Magierowski, if Donald Trump intensifies his, very controversial but also confrontational one stance towards Europe, whether through security measures like withdrawing troops or putting new tariffs. How should Poland navigate our long-term but also short-term strategy of alignment with both Washington but at the same time Brussels?
I would say there is a variety of reasons why the current administration is so, the current administration's approach to Europe is so negative and so pessimistic in the longer term. I think ideology plays a fundamental role in what they say and how they view Europe and the transatlantic relationship nowadays. Now, whenever I spoke about the transatlantic relations with my American interlocutors in Washington, D.C., in my previous capacity as Polish ambassador to that country, I rarely heard terms like ally, friend, or partner, competitor popped up from time to time. Not yet rival, not yet foe, but competitor was the most frequently used term which not only my Republican friends, but also some Democrats were using in order to describe this particular and so important relationship between Europe or the European Union or the major European capitals and the United States, which is not, I was not bewildered. It was not particularly striking for me, but the sequence was quite characteristic. And the sequence of those statements that we heard afterwards, especially Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, that was just proof of how negatively the American administration sees the transatlantic relationship today. That's why it's one of the reasons why we are facing an excruciating dilemma, because on the one hand, we have to keep reiterating our message to Mr. Trump himself and to his closest advisors that Poland can take care of itself in terms of our political standing and our military expenditures. Don't worry, we are increasing our military expenses consistently and boldly. On the other hand, we have to persuade our American friends that any reduction of American military presence in Europe wouldn't be in our interest, neither in yours. And I think this is the same dilemma the president-elect will be facing shortly. I would add to that my expectation that he would try to strike the right balance between his potentially very good relationship with Mr. Trump and our relations with the major European capitals, Berlin, Paris, and also his stance on all those recurrent statements of some European political leaders about the necessity of decoupling ourselves from America, both politically and militarily, which is a preposterous idea, in my view. We don't have the cards, to use Mr. Trump's favorite term, to render Europe or the major European actors completely independent of American presence and American engagement in Europe. And I think these will be the priorities, at least in the first stages of Mr. Nawrocki's presidency, which I would personally be very much focused on.
I wanted to ask it about later, but you said that you served in the Washington, so I would like to ask, how do you perceive the future with regards to 10 years we've had with President Duda, and now with the same representative, I mean, from the same party? Do you see a pattern for developing those relations, or everything will stay the same? Because both presidents are meeting again within a few months, probably. The very first visit could be to the US. Do you see it will be a whip hand from our side, or another challenge that the US will require more involvement from Poland in the Washington, D.C. than in Brussels?
I'd like to commend President Duda especially for his efforts to strengthen and to deepen also his personal relations with other Central European leaders, especially in the Baltics. This is something that will go down in history books probably as one of his greatest achievements. We can discuss his other accomplishments and also some political blunders. For some of them, I am myself responsible as his former spokesman. But anyway, in our region, I think he has laid the foundation of a very positive common approach of the Baltics and of other Central European countries, not only against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, but also, for example, in our relationship with major Western players, and also in our relationship with America. There are some, just on final note, there are some evident differences in President Duda's and President-elect Nawrocki's approach to Ukraine. I believe that President Nawrocki has been and will be a little bit more assertive in our bilateral relationship with especially President Zelensky. It's very hard to predict to what extent he will be ready to, so to speak, to reverse course. I don't think he will. But anyway, it will be interesting to see all his statements on Ukraine, not on Russia, but on Ukraine and on our bilateral relationship with Kiev.
Thank you very much. Director Profic, I would like to ask about our different allies, different chances to develop foreign strategy. Because in Poland we've been hearing a lot about building global partnerships. However, I reckon we do not have that many capabilities and also possibilities to work with all countries as a superpower. So we have to distinguish and choose particular partners. Where do you see that Poland should be the most engaged? I mean, rather in Brussels, or maybe in the global south, or perhaps Central Asia should be our black horse?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for that question, and it gives me the opportunity to also refer back a little bit to the comments that we've heard, because yeah, these things come together. So I think that right now for Poland, we're in a moment where we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I mean by walking is to absolutely try to continue to forge and strengthen a bilateral relationship with the United States. But the chewing part, the one which has been far more in the background for the last 8 years because of 8 years of PIS, is the European side. And while being able to maintain a bilateral relationship, I think that Poland's primary focus right now, before the 2027 election in particular, should be with our European partners. And the reason, let me tell you why I think that. We are absolutely dependent on the United States when it comes to military capabilities, there's no doubt, but this is a relationship that we've taken care of very well, equipment that we've bought, and a predominant part of our military gear is from the United States. The part that has been less cared for is developing capabilities with Europeans. And I acknowledge this is not an easy task. It's not an easy task at the EU level because the EU is not set for that. It's not an easy task with European partners. However, in view of the demands, the requests that we've been hearing from DC for a longer time than just under President Donald Trump, but much earlier, there is a call for Europe to step up. The only way that Europe can step up is for from now on to put a lot of focus on developing these capabilities. And the beautiful thing about this model is that if we as Europeans, using EU money, and you mentioned the commissioner, DG Defis is putting forward 150 billion euros in loans. There's the national escape clause, which allows countries to activate in their therefore not count their debt as part of the limits within the EU. PESCO is now also being revitalized, probably not the best example of concrete military capabilities that have been developed, but it has been successful when it comes to military mobility, for example, and the space components, the capabilities within the space. And thanks to the white paper at an EU level, we've now managed to identify 7 capability gaps, and the EU is putting a lot of emphasis on developing critical enablers on which we are just far too dependent on the United States. And this is the area of focus that Poland should focus on for a while, in the hope that, number one, we develop these capabilities. Of course, this is a medium to long-term perspective, but this is the walking and chewing gum at the same time, continuing the relationship with the US and developing these in order to secure more conscious independence from the United States, and making sure in the meantime that at the end of the day, when we do manage by 2035 to develop critical enablers in Europe, then the United States comes to us and says, pats us on the back and says, well done, guys, you've done this. This is what we've been asking for, and therefore does not pull back entirely, because part of the pulling back is because of the criticism, and rightfully so. Yeah, that's...
Okay, with regards to the European Union or to Europe, do you see any particular partner you would like to name? One, or it's more about Visegrad Group, Weimar Triangle, or perhaps Safran, Thales, Rheinmetall? I mean, should we go for one partner, or it's in general the European Union with all 27 states?
Oh, yeah. So it's not about developing an EU army. It's not about developing capabilities at an EU level. It's about, to use a blunt word, to use the European Union and its financial resources, which are now plentiful, in order to develop capabilities that have also been identified in the NATO NDPP, so through the NATO requirements, and in order to be able to also fulfill regional plans that we've promised to. So it's not undermining NATO in any way. It's actually just wisely making use of the instruments and the financial mechanisms that are available. So when it comes to individual partnerships for Poland, well, we're doing this. To name three very obvious ones. There's France, and we just signed a bilateral treaty in Nancy, which may or may not be ratified by the new president, because there's some skepticism on his part when it comes to Article 7 and the climate aspect. Regardless of whether it's ratified, this does not preclude Poland from increasing its trade with France, particularly in the area of defense. Number two, there's the UK, with whom we will also be signing a security and defense agreement. And number three, and this is far more difficult, especially now in a new political climate with a president that may potentially be more skeptical towards it, is Germany, of course. And I think that it's also, and there's the Baltics as well, and the Nordics, and we've already signed an agreement with Sweden. So there's a diverse range. I don't think the Visegrad 4 at all. That's not the direction in which we want to go. But just one more point on Germany, which I think is really important to make to really drive home the point about why it's important to develop these capabilities bilaterally through industries, using EU money, finding partners within Europe. And these may be partners from outside. There's also Canada, and Canada has expressed a lot of interest in specific EU instruments. It has Switzerland has recently also joined PESCO project. So there's interest from third countries in order to make use of the financial instruments available from the EU. But Germany will also do that, and it's particularly important for Poland to try to forge defense relationships and joint ventures with German companies because, and this is on a very sort of emotional historical level, we don't want Germany to be developing its own capabilities on itself. We want it to be developing on an EU level together with other partners and not leave others behind. So this is a way to actually avoid a more dangerous situation in Europe, which we wouldn't want to do it jointly.
Thank you. We just finished the first round, so you can make comments about your answers. You can make comments about the answers of other speakers. Everything that is happening on the stage stays on the stage, so don't be afraid to comment about that. Yeah, let's go with the most difficult ones I prepared for you, Ambassador Fried. Again about Poland, but how should Poland balance the escalating competition between China and the United States in order to, on the one hand, attract investments, but on the other hand, not to sacrifice, strategic independence or simply to lose the trust of allies?
This isn't that hard a question. They're hard. I thought you were going to ask something that's really hard. This is an operational challenge. I think it's important for all countries to screen foreign investment on security grounds. The United States has been doing it for many years. This is not a Trump administration thing. Europe is starting to do it, and Poland should do it. For one thing, you don't want companies that appear to be Luxembourg that are actually Russian fronts, okay? And Poles don't need any American to tell them that. So screening for security is important. The Chinese have a habit of buying up strategic centers, key ports, key industries, and trying to get some leverage that way. Poland, like other European countries, is going to have to decide where to draw the line between the Chinese money you want and the Chinese influence you don't want. And I don't believe that the Chinese will be the only investors, right? It's not as if it's China or no one. Probably Poland will have a choice in some of the key industries. So it's an operational problem, but it's not a strategic choice. I think that Chinese money comes with sufficient strings attached that a lot of countries in Europe are now waking up to the potential problem. So this is a problem that can be solved. Like I said, I thought you were going to have something really hard.
So the follow-up, we do expect the presence of the American soldiers on, European soil. What about the presence of European soldiers in Indo-Pacific? How should we, maneuver ourselves with regards to this problem? Because from my perspective, now the European presence with regards to what the Washington is doing is not on the very first shelf. It's like the third or even the fourth topic.
Yeah, my guess is that the Trump administration wants Europe to take care of European defense while the U.S. takes care of more Indo-Pacific things. I think it would be a mistake for the Americans, for the Trump administration to decide that Europe has to be completely on its own. I think that would be a blunder. I think that it is fair, however, for the Trump administration to push the Europeans, especially the Germans, to spend more. And so you have a potential happy ending coming into potential view. I'm thinking of the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Whitaker, who has started talking in recent weeks about a new level of transatlantic relations based on much greater European defense contributions, and on that basis, a renewed American commitment to European security. That's the happy ending. If the Americans are interested in European contributions to Indo-Pacific defense, okay. But I think the first order of business is for Europe to work on its own defense, to work things out with the Americans so that Trump can claim a win. He likes nothing better than that, but a win based on actual greater European contributions. So you stabilize that. What I don't want to see is the mistaken, and John and I have talked about this for some time, you don't want to see the American strategists who believe that U.S. security interests should be focused Asia first and only to get the upper hand. That's the problem. We've been down this road before. It's not pretty. And I think you can see a decent outcome coming into view.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. Let's try to a little bit change our direction, and I would like to ask you to give some kind of piece of advice. And what would your key advice to Polish decision makers seeking to ensure the US sustains support to Europe and also to Poland? What would you say to them?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, you are in a uniquely advantageous position with this administration. Outgoing President Duda had a great personal relationship with Trump. You've already been congratulated. The new president's been congratulated by Trump. Hegseth, who said some fatuous things at the Munich Security Conference, has praised Poland as a model ally. So you are, to use a phrase from the 1960s, in like Flint with these guys. And you need to cultivate that. Macron and Starmer, as they began to develop the concept of European force to deploy to Ukraine, made a point of going to Washington, reminding Trump this was his idea, and then calling him every week or so to report progress. That kind of approach would work well for Poland's new president and for Polish leaders overall. So that's one. Two, again, you understand, and by you I mean collectively the Polish people, because of your difficult history at the hands of Russian imperialists and Polish leaders, what is happening in Europe today, the danger to Poland, but also to all of Europe, of a revisionist Russian national security policy, which also threatens the United States' interests. And you need to use your influence in Washington to make sure that the Trump team understands that. There are obviously members of the team who do. Sadly, there are influential members in that team who don't. This is a little bit of a delicate balance for you, because you don't want to create waves or tensions in your relationship with the new administration. But if you maintain a happy relationship with a Trump team that's in the middle of essentially cutting our aid to Ukraine, or rather our support for Ukraine, which is different from aid in the form of American gifts, in a way that's threatening your security, that's a problem, a big problem for Poland. So this is a delicate dance that you have to perform to ensure your vital interests are protected with American help. The China angle factors in here as well. I understand interest in economic cooperation with the world's second largest economy, but you have to weigh that against the possible impact of a developing relationship on your, at this point, still special relationship with the Trump White House. Those are the big issues. Last thing. I know something about Polish politics, but maybe just enough to get myself into trouble. You have to be careful, and this is really to the new leadership coming in, not to permit smaller level, albeit important, historical differences get in the way of the big geopolitical task that threatens your future. So you have to manage historical sensitivities here in your relationship with Ukraine in a way that only increases support across Europe and across the Atlantic to make sure Putin doesn't win in Ukraine.
My dossier is the French Republic, so before the panel I said that if you name France at least 3 times, I will ask about it. So again, to follow up, how do you perceive this treaty between Poland and the French Republic? Because it just signed just a few weeks before the election, and I had a pleasure to talk some of American representatives, and it could be challenging. Macron went to Singapore and said that China and the US are fussing feathers and are trying to a little bit destroy this peace that we have in Asia. How do you see this?
I've always had a certain measured admiration for French insistence on an international role which goes beyond their throw weight. And that goes back, of course, to the great French hero, de Gaulle, right? The leader of a very small group of forces who claimed that he deserved every bit as much attention as Churchill and Roosevelt, and managed to get more than he probably otherwise would have gotten. And that Gaullist approach has been consistent with French policy, and even when the Gaullists have not been in power. So that's my take on France's policy overall. Now, I have been unimpressed up until roughly 3 months ago by French policy towards an aggressive Russia that we began to see with the war on Georgia in 2008. We all know the feckless role that Sarkozy played in the settlement, quote unquote, of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and then permitting Russia to violate virtually all the terms of the settlement. And we saw Hollande and Macron, up until a few months ago, essentially refusing to see the danger posed by Putin's policy. So that's my criticism of French policy, and relatively large. But when it seemed that the new administration, at the time of the Munich Security Conference, was taking an equally feckless approach, Macron stood up and showed real leadership on the issue of the French forces, European forces going to Ukraine, and then also France and other European powers, including Poland, including the Brits, etc., filling some of the void that might be created if American military supplies to Ukraine diminish. Great stuff. Bottom line. Now I come back specifically to your question. I welcomed the outreach, Macron's outreach to Poland, as part of strengthening the ties within Europe to deal with the Russian danger. I would hope that this could continue in the wake of the election, for the good of Poland, for the good of France, and for the good of Europe. But Macron on China is again, the French trying to play the gadfly role to stick it to the United States, which has not been particularly helpful over the course of the last 60 years. Although, to be fair to the French, when the chips were down, like in 1962, de Gaulle told Kennedy, "We are with you." And so hopefully that's how this will all play out.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Makierowski. So the title of our panel is Poland's Strategic Partnership in a Changing World, New Roads and Old Ties. How do you perceive our role with regards to potential resolution of the war? I do know that this potential peacekeeping mission is rather irrelevant, but if you can describe from your perspective and experience, what would be and what should be our role?
Before I answer your question, I would like to refer to 2 points made by Daniel and Marta about China. In my previous incarnation as Deputy Foreign Minister, it was 8 years ago, I was responsible, among many other galaxies, for Poland's relations with China, and I visited the country on several occasions. And on the very first day of my very first visit to Beijing, I came to the realization that I found myself not in a communist country. It was an empire. So that obsession of our Chinese host with greatness and their imperial past was so overwhelming. And whenever I hear arguments wielded by American politicians, mostly Republicans, about the Red Menace, about communist China, it's not correct. I mean, we have to realize we are dealing with an empire and not Red Menace anymore. It's not a communist country. By empire, I mean a country, a state, an empire with tremendous economic and technological capabilities. And my impression is that we are still in the early stages of understanding, of comprehending who we are really dealing with. Secondly, on our relationship with Ukraine and other European countries. I don't know if you will concur with this assertion, but I can see a certain realignment today within NATO and within the European Union. There is an axis of countries which understand contemporary Russia much better than others. And I mean Central Europe, Poland, the Czech Republic, maybe not Hungary and Slovakia, but the Baltics, certainly, the Scandinavians, and also the UK. These are the countries which have somehow, forged a special bond based on the common perception of contemporary Russia and of President Putin's malign intentions. Now, it has its upsides and its downsides, of course, because it somehow damages NATO's and the European Union's cohesion. On the other hand, and this is one of the arguments I was using abundantly in my talks with my American friends, I used the so-called Bucha criterion, a term I coined myself. In what countries in Europe another Bucha might occur? Certainly Poland, on the outskirts of Warsaw. I can easily imagine another massacre of this kind on the outskirts of Poland's capital, Prague, Bucharest, but also Helsinki. Berlin, to a lesser extent, certainly not Paris, probably not Brussels. But these are the countries in which another Bucha would be possible. And this is paradoxically and gruesomely one of the factors which unite us in a very intense manner. And your question was about?
Exactly about we are talking about. So Bucha, Ukraine.
Yeah.
How should
Poland's role in a hypothetical.
Yeah. How should we position ourselves with regards to Ukraine? The end of war, peacekeeping mission is.
I'm not terribly upbeat on this perspective, and I would tell you an anecdote. After that trip to Kiev of 4 European political leaders, Starmer, Merz, Macron, and Tusk. When I was a few days afterwards, I was poring over reports in French, German, and Italian and Spanish media. Believe me or not, Prime Minister Tusk was rarely mentioned. It was, shocking for me to see that they were mentioning Starmer, Merz, and Macron. The trip to Kiev of 3 European leaders. Tusk was somehow omitted. I don't know why. And then I realized that maybe that the Iron Curtain, which collapsed in 1991 and no longer exists, at least physically, still does exist in the mentality of many Western societies. Now, circling back to your question about the Polish-French treaty, again, I wouldn't be terribly optimistic about the deepening of this cooperation, because it all boils down to one simple question: to what extent France needs Poland today to pursue its international agenda. And I also I was a journalist for over 20 years, and I wrote extensively about European affairs, and it's no secret that that mask of European values and European interests and common European foreign policy is just a mask. So we should ask ourselves not a question about Poland's role in Europe, but quite sadly, to what extent Poland will be useful for the major players in Europe, Germany, France, maybe some others, to pursue their own interests on the international stage.
It greatly fits my last question to Director Profic. I went through all your, extraordinary experience. I read some of your papers, including also the papers from ESFR. So you have often written on Poland's role in Europe and also its Euro-Atlantic and transatlantic orientation. And I would like to ask, are we structurally bound between Brussels and Washington, or perhaps we can look for other potential partners? We name already China, but in my mind I have, for instance, India, Turkey, South Korea. How do you perceive it? Because we've been talking for the past 45 minutes about new ties all the roads, but we mentioned just a few partners. Perhaps you can give us more, just simply saying that we bought outrageous number of military equipment from South Korea.
No, absolutely. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to come back to circle back to what's already been said, to comment and just make an extra point about the European front. But first of all, your question, absolutely. Poland, again, in the walking and chewing gum and chewing a lot of gum at the same time, I guess, and a lot of walking, we have to pursue partnerships, global partnerships with countries that we perhaps don't always agree on their views on Russia as well. That's been problematic, I think, for Poland to go beyond that, and perhaps to a certain degree ignoring the fact that countries such as India do have still a relationship with Russia. But I think we're in times where we need to start looking past that, or perhaps use it more wisely in the sense of building a relationship through which we can then still make our specific points. And among those countries, there's also Turkey, as you mentioned, and I think that Prime Minister Donald Tusk has been pursuing that relationship recently, also in view of the war in Ukraine and the potential role that Turkey can play. There's also Japan and Australia and Canada amongst the partners that are definitely in the like-minded camp and very easy to pursue. But returning to Europe just for a second, because I feel that perhaps this is just because of this particular setting, but I'm really glad that I'm on this panel actually to give you more of the European view and explain to you how complicated it actually is on the European front. Because I think we've really done a great job in Poland of building a great relationship with the United States. And it would be fantastic if that can be continued regardless of whoever is in power. The problem with the European front is that if you carry big guns, and Poland currently carries big guns and plans on carrying very big guns for the foreseeable future, in Europe, you need to evoke trust. This is what I mentioned with Germany. This also applies to Poland. And when you actually speak with colleagues, with different people from whether it's Germany or France or other European countries, they do want to make sure that Poland is a European country staying on track with its European partnerships, being transparent, having good relationships with European countries, not just with the United States, because honestly, this is the way that it's perceived in Europe. Poland as forging a relationship with the United States and therefore caring a lot less about the Europeans. So, and this is dangerous. This is quite frankly dangerous because we do not, therefore, evoke that much trust. And I think that Prime Minister Tusk has been doing a very good job at really trying to strengthen those individual relationships and build Poland's position on the EU stage. And I do not at all think that France or Germany does not need Poland. In the shape and form that Poland is right now, as an economic power, as a military power, and with a leadership that is transparent and cares about democracy, because there's no doubt that the European Union also has a big priority when it comes to the values that it pursues, and they're values from a particular sort of area, let's put it that way. Right now, at this stage, Poland's participation, whether it's Weimar Plus or the E5, which is a quickly developing format also, and the coalition of the willing, Poland is being taken seriously. And it doesn't matter that Poland wasn't mentioned, that Donald Tusk was not mentioned in the Kiev trip. I think that that's just a trivial omission. It is actually true that Poland has now, in the last 1.5 years, joined a core group. And these are things that we're hearing not from leadership, not in the media. These are things that we're hearing in the hallways of the MFA at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are talking about a core group of Europeans to which Poland belongs, and they cannot imagine a Europe and a reassurance mission, for that matter, under which Poland would not be there, because it's militarily strong, because it's economically strong, and it's up there together with Germany. And it's only if we continue to evoke this trust and therefore forge these relationships, not at the expense of the one with the United States, but again, walking and chewing gum at the same time, but making sure that our European partners really understand where we're going. And at certain times, continuing only the U.S. relationship and buying only U.S. equipment and not caring about the European front puts us in a very difficult situation. And I think that there's another aspect. I think, Ambassador, you mentioned this, that Poland has, under Karol Nawrocki, has a special place and political capital with the Trump administration. I'm really glad to hear that. At the same time, you said that it should therefore use this special relationship and be the one that tells Europeans what they need to do about their defense. We're not going to be able to do that if we're not evoking that trust. We're not going to be able to do that if we're not investing in European defense equipment, if we're not following and leading on the EU stage, if we're not forging individual relationships with and buying European equipment, buying French equipment, doing joint ventures with Germany. We are not going to be in a position, because they are just generally distrustful if we only put emphasis on our U.S. relationship. And one more sort of more emotional sort of a sentiment that I'm starting to get, and I'll just mention that for the last many years I spent time in the American setting. I worked for the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and now I'm working for a European organization. So I feel I have this particular sensitivity, and I'm seeing it completely differently now, having worked on the US portfolio for such a long time. I think that what it really boils down to is that the French, for example, I'm just using this as an example, I think they want to get the same feeling of trust, and I'm not going to use the word devotion, but something akin to devotion as we give to the United States. I'm pretty sure that any American would say, yes, Poles are really on top of their game when it comes to liking the Americans. 95% of the population are pro-American. And the French want to have that same feeling. Why should they not? Why should we only give those sorts of emotions and buying equipment from American counterparts?
Thank you very much. I will use the privilege of being a chairman of this panel, and I promise our audience they will have the possibility to ask questions. So on the right corner, you have this timing. So each of you have 1 minute to give one final comment and wrap it up. So please, Ambassador, 1 minute just to summary all your statements and ideas.
I want to follow up on the question of Poland, the Polish-US relationship, and the Polish-European relationship. So I agree that Poland needs to work with Europe closely. But Ambassador Mogierowski is right. The Germans and the French patronized the Poles in the Baltics for years and years and years, saying that the Poles were prisoners of history, Russophobic, and too emotional, right? They were wrong, and the Poles, Lithuanians, Estonians, Latvians were right about Russia. And that patronizing attitude is the responsibility of the West Europeans to deal with. Okay? It's not just on Poland. Secondly, with respect to defense industry, I understand the point, I get that, but I would have difficulty, if I were still in the US government and talking to the Polish government as an official, I would have difficulty asking the Poles to buy American or European based purely on political considerations. Drive the hard bargain. That's going to be better. And the American companies are going to have to step up and earn it. But I don't want to, and I'm not going to give as ambassador here, I did not give American companies credit when their offers were obviously inferior. I told them to up their game. And I would say the same thing for the European companies. There's no political premium on going to the polls and saying you have to buy European to earn our trust. That works if the offer is at least as good as the American offer. If it is, fine, no problem. If it isn't, that's too bad. So this is not I'm not taking issue with you. I'm trying to make a corrective.
Yeah, Ambassador, 1 minute, please. Also, you can finish after the panel in the
2 points.
hours.
One, when you, as an individual nation, when the Poles as individual people and as part of the EU are considering using your increased defense expenditures to buy American weapons, insist that the contract give the United States government zero veto over what you do with those weapons. Because Trump, in fact, said to you, well, maybe we need to keep you on a hook because maybe you're friends now, but you'll be enemies later. And of course, we've seen a reluctance by this team to allow weapons to flow in places where maybe they need to flow. So that's got to be part of your approach. Two, yes, Poland's got to be sensitive to the rest of Europe. But I felt watching dubious, especially German and also French policies for 2+ years after the big invasion and for the 8 years preceding it, that Poland is a natural new leader in Europe. And I encourage you to have that ambition and to pursue it smartly, which means, not too much in your face with your competitors within Europe. But we need that strong Polish view of the geopolitical realities. But don't go soft on China as you do that.
I like new leader of Europe. We should finish here. Please, Ambassador Magierowski.
I don't want to be sarcastic, but I will have to, and I will, a very brief reference to what Marta said about Mr. Tusk's political standing in the European Union. I think it has much more to do with his personal relationship with other political leaders than with what he does or doesn't do. And I will just give you one example, and I will remind you of most European governments' reaction to Mr. Morawiecki's migration policies. And the very same government's reaction to Mr. Tusk's migration policies. My impression is that the current Prime Minister has even sharpened his rhetoric in this respect. So again, I couldn't agree more that, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, that I do expect and I do hope that the President-elect Nawrocki will find the right way to strike the right balance between our relationship with America and our relationship with Berlin or Paris or London, which would be greatly appreciated by both sides, by Europeans and by Americans. Because the better our relationship with Berlin, the better the perception of our country in Washington will be, regardless of who is sitting in the Oval Office today.
Director Marta, please, last statement, 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be short. In order to keep the U.S. involved, right now it's time to invest in European capabilities. And I understand the industry point, and you're absolutely right. But the thing is that if we do it through common procurement or more, so there have been suggestions of a European defense mechanism that functions outside of the EU setting. It's a Bruegel paper. So many ideas in order to make sure that the costs of buying equipment don't go up once we all start doing that. But in order to rectify the market, we need to be able to invest in European capabilities right now. And that's the way, that's the beauty of the project. That's the way we keep the US involved, by strengthening European capabilities, which is what the US is asking for.
Thank you. The question from the audience. Is anyone here that would like to ask a question? Okay, please, Ambassador. Do we have a mic? Okay.
Sorry, I had two different hats for the past 25 years, both as a practitioner, as Poland's ambassador, and as a researcher. I've been researching the Poland's position in NATO since 1997. So this relating to the perception of Poland in the rest of Europe. There's something which I discovered a long time ago, that sometimes we see our position as lower than other European countries are seeing it. It's just by the way of a comment. As a researcher, as it happens, I was tasked a few months ago to do research on Poland's procurement and EU, and relating, I don't know if it's the same Bruegel paper, if it's the same one, there are questions about the reliability of American equipment in terms of delivery. Some types of equipment, for example, strike aircraft, I think F-16s were late deliveries of F-16s. They don't say to which country, the new version, almost 2 years late. There were other deliveries which some electronic equipment was even 4 years late. But on the other side of the coin, that how reliable cooperation in Europe is. We have 3 different strike aircraft plans or consortiums in Europe. One led by, I'm sure one is led by Italy. There is a Swedish one, and there were so many talks, and still there was no way of even working on any kind of cooperation between these programs. So Europe is developing. We're talking about acquiring some capabilities, industrial capabilities that American industry has, but we cannot coordinate things that already are in Europe. So what would be your view to overcome these 2 problems or 2 obstacles?
It's a difficult question, also the huge one, because SCAF program with regards to jets is quite huge. Anyone would like to answer these questions, like briefly, or maybe briefly, Ambassador?
I'm not an expert on the arms industry, but given the work I've been doing on our policy towards Ukraine, I have some idea. I'm not going to address the European side, I just don't know. On the American side, there's no question that the big bureaucracy that is the Pentagon has been slow and not particularly competent at shepherding arms deals with foreign partners. Actually, and they're not the only ones that play the role. The State Department does as well. The bureaucracy is not well run on this, and this was true under Biden. I'm sad to say it's still true under Trump. In theory, given the transactional interests of the new president, well, the not so new president, this could be corrected. But frankly, I've seen no steps to address that. Having said that, someone I work with knows this issue really well, Deborah Kagan. I'll give you my card. You can contact me, and I can connect you with her. She might give you more precision on this.
Thank you. Question there, please.
Thank you. Anthony Pojanowski, Embassy of Canada to Poland. I have a question because I think all panelists mentioned about enhancing the capabilities and military investments. At the same time, I think one of the ambassadors said, don't go soft on China. And my question is, recent reporting shows that 7 critical materials necessary for the NATO military industry are almost solely supplied by China. 5 others, China has a very large stake in their supply. And the US has noticed that and is starting to do something about that, but it's still a long way. Europe is even further ahead, and it seems that many European countries don't even see it as a threat. So I have a question: how to combine these two views in enhancing and increasing our military build-up, and at the same time not increasing our reliance on China and our dependence?
We would have to invade Greenland.
One answer, please.
No. No.
That's later.
And to anyone from the Canadian government, my regrets for the reintroducing America's longstanding desire to annex Canada. Let us say that we tried twice and Canada beat us both times. You know, slam dunk. Okay. No, there won't be. But my serious answer is that the U.S. and Europe ought to be working together to manage the supply chain difficulties and China's monopoly of upstream inputs into those supply chains. And rather than fighting over, we have to find a way to get beyond yelling at each other or having weekly crises on tariffs and start working on the common problem, which is supply chain independence. And whether the Trump administration, hopefully the Trump administration will take its own rhetoric seriously that China is the pacing threat of the 21st century and act upon that realization rather than treating Europe as an equal problem. They have a little trouble integrating different aspects of their policy. And
also, in the meantime, obviously, we will still be reliant on China for certain products. Just as, we at the Atlantic Council have been big on sanctions for Russia, but we've understood that we needed Russian nuclear fuel. We're trying to fix that now, but that's the same idea. And this is doable.
And Canadian uranium, by the way. On a more serious note, I remember the heated debate in Germany just after the war in Ukraine started about the dependence and the addiction of the German economy, and especially the heavy industry, to Russian hydrocarbons. And so many experts, so many pundits, and so many politicians were arguing it is simply not possible to wean ourselves off imports of Russian gas. And they did wean themselves off imports of Russian gas, and they reduced the reliance on Russian hydrocarbons virtually to zero. So it is possible. And that is the best indicator that what you need is political will. And not only the economic calculus. You need political will to even start thinking about how to diversify imports of rare earths, for example, and to wean ourselves off China in this case.
I think we have the title for the next panel next year, Aaron. So thank you very much. A huge round of applause for our best speakers. Thank you very much. You can approach our speakers after the panel and also visit Atlantic Council, and huge congratulations for the whole team for organizing this marvelous event. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. This concludes Warsaw Week 2025.